My reading, if I'm sight reading, oh, it's a complete joke. I mean, it'll mean something else completely. It won't make any sense at all.
When I'm reading, I might skip lots of words out, and if my brain doesn't know what it means, they just make something else up.
I love reading, I adore it, it's one of my favourite hobbies, but the spelling, I have horrible spelling. I can't spell anything, I'm really bad.
As dyslexics, we struggle with spelling, punctuation and grammar. That's because these are sort of quite formulaic. They have rules that govern them, and we just find it really hard to remember the rules.
To do an essay, I did everything possible to avoid doing that. I would do the picture in great detail before I even started the essay. And then the class would be over and I'd be, phew.
It's really important to know that you're dyslexic, because if you don't, you could get really annoyed at yourself that you don't know how to read and write properly.
Literacy, I would say, is a person's ability to not only take in information in a written form, but then to also express their understanding of it or their interpretation of it in a written form as well.
It's comprehension, it's decoding, it's spelling, it's writing. They all combine to make this difficult beast for our students to have to tackle.
So it's more complex than just being able to sit there and recognize that C-A-T says cat. It's taking that word and being able to do something with it, and then be able to express your own thoughts and ideas about it as well.
So we really need to be conscious as educators to dive in, pull it apart, and really tackle those explicit skills. Give them the strategies individually so they can put it all back together again.
Many dyslexics, their difficulties manifest itself in challenges with reading. And what that really comes down to is a difficulty holding on to and manipulating individual sounds.
Initially, the weaknesses are around the development of phonic knowledge in relation to reading. So the student has a problem with mastering the relationship between sounds and symbols, word building and word analysis. When you learn to read, you look at a word written and it's made up of individual letters. Each of those letters has an individual sound. That's the phonic. And we call it grapheme-phoneme correspondence, the relationship between the sound and the symbol. When we begin phonics, we begin by learning simple sounds, like A says ah. But then when we're looking at a more complex word, two letters can be grouped together to make a unit of sound, like SH makes sh at the beginning of a word. And it's learning those components, those simple phonemes, that helps the dyslexic to understand how you can then build it.
A child's ability to decode a word, like cat, is different from their ability to understand what a cat is, and the larger picture, and what all this could mean in terms of the greater story and the context of it.
Good readers will be able to decode fluently and accurately, and they will also question their understanding. So they will check that they've understood it, they will ask about words they didn't understand, they will predict what might happen next, they will think about the characters and the way they're behaving in the way they are.
There's a lot we can do for dyslexic learners to become better readers. But for many of them, they're always going to be slower readers. For some students, the automaticity piece, the ability to see letters and associate it with the sounds, and to see words as a whole and immediately pull out what they are. For some, regardless of how much remediation we give them, it's always going to be a little bit more of an arduous task for them. But it doesn't mean they can't comprehend and understand complex, important ideas.
If you want a child to enjoy books, get them books that they might enjoy. There's something called high-low reading books, which is a high interest age but a lower decoding age. So for instance, they would be able to find a book that was appropriate for a 9-year-old but had the reading level of a 5-year-old. The reason we read is because we want to know what's there. It's not because we want to be able to decode words, it's because we want to read what's in the book.
Dyslexic learners tend to have a difficult time with anything that is a rules-based approach, and anything that requires them to retrieve or instantly pull out a fact or a rule or memorize something to that degree. So that often manifests itself in difficulties with spelling, with grammar, with punctuation. We also find because dyslexic students have a difficult time reading, they don't read as often as we would like, and therefore they don't get a lot of practice to understand how grammar and punctuation are used in context.
Spelling is another challenge for dyslexic students. A phonics-based system will really give them rules, tips, and tricks to help them so they don't have to rely on just memorizing.
A typical phonics lesson, we're coming up with silly mnemonics or sayings and phrases to remember the spellings of words.
We talk about the word could, C-O-U-L-D, and we would say, could old umbrellas leak drops?
We're getting up and using movement and dances and song to remember different spelling rules. So it's very important that you're engaging your students in a multisensory approach so that they have as many avenues as possible.
Punctuation and grammar is difficult for someone who's dyslexic because there's so much to remember, there's so much to process. You're processing the letters on the page, you're making them into words, you're checking your understanding, you're checking where the words even are on the page, and then at some point you've got to apply this punctuation to it as well.
You need to allow your students to use tools to help support those deficits. So allow your students to use a program with spell check or use a program like Grammarly that will catch those errors for them. Give them an opportunity to write drafts. Let them come up with the first draft, and then help them with the punctuation, help them with the spelling, and then give them the opportunity to do it again.
Teachers often want to jump to a writing piece and automatically look for incorrect spelling or punctuation or capitalization, and it's so important to make sure that you're looking at the content.
Because dyslexic students struggle with thinking in a linear fashion, getting their ideas on paper can be difficult. Along with that, they also struggle to really retain what they've written and remember that they've already explained what the character is doing and they don't need to explain it again, or they've forgotten to mention where they are and so it kind of gets thrown in the middle of a story. So a great simple thing to help dyslexic students is to give them an opportunity to pre-write, to organize, to use a graphic organizer, to get all their ideas out on paper, and now they're not having to pull that information out of their brain, it's right next to them.
So many dyslexics tend to have relatively slow processing, which I think it's important to understand has nothing to do with intelligence or their ability to generate ideas, but it can affect the speed at which they take in written information, and it can also affect their ability to then reproduce or to express themselves in that written form as well.
The dyslexic student really benefits from extended time getting their thoughts on paper because it might take their brain longer to get through their ideas, to develop them. They need that time and that support to really work through their ideas.
A traditional student might only need 30 minutes to complete an exam. A dyslexic learner might need an hour and even an hour and a half to show what they know in that kind of format.
When we think about literacy, it's made up of many components. It's not just one thing you can pinpoint.
It is not just the aspect of teaching just reading or just spelling or just punctuation. It is a continuum throughout your school day.
Dyslexic learners, incredibly bright, incredibly capable people, and our classrooms need to be engineered in such a way that we bring that out and that we support that. Throughout history, and even today, some of the most popular writers in the world are dyslexic.
The teachers that I had recognized how important it was that I knew that the points that I was making and the pieces of creative writing, the stories that I were telling, were great and were valid and were interesting, and that they gave me a mark for that. And that the spelling and the punctuation was entirely different. Because when you split them up, you're not saying you're not intelligent enough. What you're saying is, hey, you're not very good at this bit, and that's fine. That's fine. Deal with that bit, but well done because that was a great story.